Thanks for listening to Baxy's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to like it, share it, review it, disperse it amongst all your friends. I should also tell you that this and all Rock 102 podcasts are now available on the brand spanking new Rock 102 app, which is available completely free for iPhone and Android. You'll find it on the App Store. It makes listening to the podcast ridiculously simple. Also, be sure to follow on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates on future episodes. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee. Visit their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or log on to metrojeep.com and drive away in your new Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram today. Now, let's get into today's episode with Iain Slater from APB on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
When most people think of funk, they usually think of people like James Brown or George Clinton or Sly Stone or Bootsy Collins or the Ohio Players. But it's probably not very likely that the first thing to pop into your head would be the rich funk tradition of Scotland. And yet, for a period of time in the early 1980s, three guys from Aberdeen, Scotland, were setting New York City dance clubs on fire with a single that was nearly impossible to find outside of the import section of your local record store. The name of that track was 1981's Shoot You Down by the band APB. APB was a band that had recorded a handful of singles for the small, independently owned Scottish label called Oily Records. APB included Iain Slater on bass and vocals, George Shane on drums, and guitarist Glenn Roberts. Together, they released a sound that fused funk with a punk sensibility, and as crazy as that might have sounded in 1981, APB were building what would become a highly influential pile of songs that would inspire bands like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Franz Ferdinand, the Beastie Boys, and more than just a few Britpop bands as well. And it came from Scotland. Golf, haggis, bagpipes, those are the things you expect out of Scotland. Insanely funky dance grooves? Maybe not so much. Of course, there were other bands at the time that flirted with making danceable punk records like the Au Pairs, Delta 5, and the Gang of Four. But none of those bands were getting their records played in New York to the extent that APB Shoot You Down was getting played. They were even getting extensive airplay on college radio stations, and in particular, WLIR, the legendary radio station out of Long Island, New York. What's even more surprising is the band didn't even know that it was happening. Instead, they were busy releasing more singles and recording a number of sessions for the BBC, and in particular, the legendary John Peel. Following those sessions in 1982, the band took off for their very first tour of the United States, only to discover that their early singles were in high demand. Songs like Rainy Day and What Kind of Girl were being met with enthusiastic response both with John Peel in the UK, but especially in New York and other parts of the Northeast. That tour would be the first of 12 U.S. tours to come in the next 7 years, which included performances with The Clash and James Brown and many others. And by 1985, APB released their very first full-length album called Something to Believe In, which included all of those earlier singles. Their next album, A Cure for the Blues, would follow the next year. 10 years later, those BBC sessions, including the ones with John Peel, were released as the Radio 1 Sessions. That album is being released by Liberation Hall Records. The reissue not only includes all of the original tracks that appeared on the record, but also a handful of songs that have never been released until now. Liberation Hall has already reissued the band's first three albums, but the Radio 1 Sessions are an incredible document of a band who is long overdue for another round of serious consideration. Because after listening to it again, that shit is funky as hell. This is my interview with APB bass player and lead singer Iain Slater on Baxy's Musical Podcast. I've been listening to the Radio 1 sessions for like the last couple of days, and it's so interesting to listen to the chronology of these songs and these sessions. And that first John Peel session in '81, it's all stripped down funk, but as you move into the record a little bit more with the David Jensen sessions, only 5 months later, you hear this confidence building, and the songs are fuller, and that continues through the second Peel session and the Peter Power session and back to Jensen. When you go back and have listened to these sessions again after all this time, what are your thoughts about it? How does that connect to you now?
And to be honest, it's such a long time ago that it's hard to. But it's just recently I've been listening to it again. Yeah, but exactly what you just said. Yeah, you can hear you can hear a linear kind of a growing.
Yeah, it's very, very noticeable how I don't know if it's because the first time you were in with an appeal session, you're nervous or hesitant or what it was, but by the time the second one rolls around, it's like you guys are in that funk pocket. It's really refreshing to listen to, when you consider this is 1981 we're talking about.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, we got the train down. It was freezing. It was the 23rd of January, I think, or December, and it was freezing cold. And the train actually had a bit of a crash. It hit some kind of pole, and we sat in a carriage, freezing cold for about 6 hours. So we arrived at 8 in the morning. That in the morning of the session, like completely freezing. And it was yeah, but so I don't think we had time to get nervous, to be honest.
Whenever I've had a chance to talk to someone who recorded sessions for Radio One, and in particular, John Peel, I always try to ask about it because we have no American version of a John Peel in the States. I mean, that kind of thing doesn't really exist and never really has. But his importance in exposing people to new music, particularly back then, is really unmatched anywhere in the world. Tell me about Peel and about his reaction to APB. You wouldn't have done a session with him unless he was giving you kind of the green light on that.
Yeah, we obviously sent them records, and I remember the first time we heard about it, we were in our local little hostelry having a game of pool, and somebody came in and John Peel's just been on the radio, and he said, if anybody knows who these guys are, get them to call me tomorrow because we're going to want to give them a session. We were like, yeah, we didn't believe them, but it was true. And then the second time we actually went down to London and waited for him outside the railway, outside the BBC, and personally handed him it, and then he played it that night. So I think that was a bit of a tradition, actually. People did it, yeah. So, and we did a couple of John Peel road shows as well when he would be DJing, in a university, and we'd be the band and stuff, like invited by him.
The power and the impact of that, to have John Peel, endorse what you're doing. I know for a lot of people, it really made all the difference in the world. It was like, a light switch goes on, and all of a sudden, there's validation for the band and what you do. Was that certainly was the case for you?
Oh, definitely, 100%. I mean, those like little record companies took a lot more notice. As soon as you did that, it's like, oh, you've done a John Peel session. It must be good. I don't know, but kind of thing. But it must have something.
My grandfather was Scottish and grew up in Scotland until the age of 5, and before they came to here in the States. And as wonderful a guy as he was, I never considered my grandfather to be particularly funky. It's like it just didn't seem to be a part of his Scottish background or his culture. It's hard to imagine like Maggot Brain and Chocolate City as rich Scottish anthems, but for you, but for you, funk really connected at a very early age. Tell me about that and how you got introduced to that form of music.
Well, I could actually pinpoint it. Me and Glenn, guitar player, we were on holiday we did an interrail thing. It's like a student type. You buy a ticket and you go around France. Interrailing on trains, and we were camping and we had 2 acoustic guitars, but there was a late night kind of club DJ guys on the campsite, and Tom Brown's Funkin' for Jamaica came on. I was like, this is the stuff that I really like, Glenn. He had an older brother who was a bit more knowledgeable, and he was like, but if you like that, you'll like Parliament, you like Funkadelic. I said, right, I'll get that when I go back. And then I went back to Aberdeen, and at this point they were not the Renaissance hadn't happened, and they were still very underground in the UK anyway. So I went into this shop and they had all these little rare, all these records with a little cutout thing, which were like in a bargain bin, and they had all of them. So first of all, I got One Nation Under a Groove and the Brides of Funkenstein, the Close of Dr. Funkenstein, and then I kept going back, and we're all about 40p, like 50 cents.
Wow!
So I just bought everything. So I've now got every vinyl record he's ever made.
There are people in the United States that haven't fully embraced what those P-Funk records were all about, but they're so great and they're just so creative and and there's just so much going on in each record. I mean, it's a form of music that I really really enjoy, but
Mm,
to think that it found its way into bargain bins in Scotland is interesting because I guess I just wouldn't have expected it to end up there.
mm. I mean, we there was when Bootsy's Ultrawave album came out. There was a clothing store called British Home Stores, and it was just and but they had two things of record, and all they had was Bootsy Collins records, like only this album, 14p, so it's 14 cents each. So
Wow.
I bought them all, and I bought them all and gave them to my friend, but I bought 15 of them and just gave them to my friend.
So this is all happening probably just prior to when punk is starting to come in, or maybe even around the same time. In
I was 19, so yeah,
okay,
so it had happened.
so by the time 78 rolls around and punk starts to decline or descend a little bit,
Mm,
much of that music is getting fused with other forms of music, much like two-tone ska and
yeah.
others. But APB comes around and you guys find a way to kind of fuse funk, which you've become a fan of, with a punk sensibility at the same time. What was the reaction to that? Did people get it right away? I mean, was there
No,
resistance to it, or what was the thought about it?
not really, I suppose, but we didn't really think about it. We just went out and played, and like because we were so not very good at doing it, it didn't really sound like it live. It didn't really sound like it was funky. We were still trying to, we're still quite rough around the edges, and we still are. But it actually went full circle as well, because even after all the sessions, we had a keyboard player, we had a percussion player for years, and we even had another bass player for a couple of years. And I was just singing and playing like the odd little bit of lead guitar, or whatever. But then it got kind of too slick, and we just really started regressing back. And now it's a lot more like it was the first couple of years.
You guys signed to Oily Records early on, and they released those
Yeah.
first couple of singles. And what's absolutely fascinating to me is that second single, "Shoot You Down," somehow finds its way into dance clubs in New York City. I mean,
Mm.
Oily was a really small independent label. You're talking maybe 3 or 4 bands in their entire roster. How did that single find its way to New York?
Well, we had there was a New York thing called Rock Pool, and Oily sent them a load of records, and they sent about 1,000 records or whatever, and they would send them out, and they would service all the club DJs and stuff. And there was a guy called Mark Bevan who he ended up being a manager, and yeah, and he knew all those guys. And then Mark came in, and Ivan got a hold of it, two quite big DJs, Dance Tia guys. And then they just started playing it to death. And then obviously it must have been going down well. So then LIR they picked it up as well.
So the song is getting played in New York in clubs and on radio, and you guys had no idea that this was happening. Is that correct? I mean, this was going on
Pretty
without your
much, yeah.
knowledge?
Mark Bevan phoned us up one day and said, via Oily Records, and said he had a tour all set up for a band called Ali Ali, a Belgian band actually, strangely, and they cancelled. And could you do it at the last minute? And so I went, yes, I think we probably could. Not knowing that people knew us over there. And we get over to New York, and like and then Mark becomes our manager, kind of thing. And then we go up to the velvet rope outside Dance Tea, and they go, "Oh, APB, sure, come in." We're like, "Wait a minute, how the hell do you know us?" Nobody had told us.
No, I mean, what was your reaction when you first found out that clubs in New York even had an idea who you were?
Incredulous. It just didn't make any sense, really.
I mean, the U.S. has always been fairly receptive to the band anyway. I mean, you guys, have been to the States a number of times, and my understanding is each time you came back, it was like 12 U.S. tours in a course of 7 years. Each
Yeah.
time, the following for APB kept getting stronger and stronger. While this is happening in the U.S., what was going on, say, like in Aberdeen or around the U.K.? Were you getting the same reaction there as you were in the U.S.?
Well, Aberdeen was that's where we were from, so they were aware of us very early. So it was always fine. There we'd sell out the venue, which is about I don't know, 800 people, that kind of thing. But in London, we'd go down, we'd still be playing tiny little clubs like Dingwalls, and we do a lot of student union gigs, things like that. But not we never were well enough. Yeah, sort of to do a full tour, like all over Britain. We just do like little guerrilla gigs here and there.
You did do some tours though with the Clash and James Brown.
Well, they were just one-off shows. We opened for the Clash in Inverness in '83, and we opened for James Brown in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Zoo in Sheepshead Bay, in again '83. Yeah.
Those are two different kinds of audiences. Were the reactions to APB similar or different in that regard?
The James Brown one was an LIR sponsored event, I do believe, and it was when he was on the bit of a downward thing, and it was before Living in America came out, so he wasn't really that. It was only a 500 capacity club in Brooklyn, and it was predominantly white as well, the audience. So it was more, a lot of the people had come to see us. Although he was he was played second, but we are the same size writing on the poster, and we both had pictures, which is ridiculous to think to contemplate. But then when America came out, and he's back in the consciousness of everybody, and he was massive again.
Sure. So so one of the things that's kind of interesting to me is that whenever I hear "Shoot You Down," it always amazes me that this came out in 1981. I mean, because that song could have been released a week ago. It's just this incredibly timeless groove. And when you hear about APB, and particularly how that song has gone on to influence other artists, what's your thought about that? I mean, how do you even wrap your head around that? It's a song you wrote when you were in your very early 20s, and here it is, kind of inspiring the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Franz Ferdinand and a bunch of others, and even some Britpop bands. You can definitely hear that there's some influence from APB in there too.
Yeah, well, you say that, but I don't know. Having said that, I've bumped into Franz Ferdinand on my other job when I do sound for bands, and and they claimed to not have heard of us back then. So and that's just like some other channeling. I don't know.
But you know what?
Uh,
They may say that, but they've heard, I think a lot of people have heard that song and didn't realize that the band doing it was APB. 'Cause I remember listening to it again, just a couple of years ago, and I was like, "Oh yeah, now I remember that song. I remember that song, fairly well." I mean, I grew up in the East Coast of the U.S. too, and it's to me, it's just a timeless song, and I'm to this day, I love listening to it. At this point in your career now, when you're playing it live, it must get this huge reaction from people still.
well, it does in America, that's for sure. Yeah, yeah. People still get up, and that's when they start trying to clamber on the stage, and it's and it's actually quite encouraged, by the way. Having a party at the end.
Well, one of the things that the band has always faced over the years, and this is true. If you were trying to find many of these records in the U.S., it was always subjugated to an import section, and it always seemed to me that the demand for these songs, the demand for these records, always exceeded the supply, whether it was from Oily Records or Link Records or whatever. That was always kind of an issue for APB. Can you explain what that was all about?
I think it was just record companies not having the money or the outlay to do it, because there was a few pressings of shoot you down. I don't even remember how many, but I don't think they pressed that many. I mean, I actually don't know. That's the only answer I can give you to that one. But they were never like big massive huge releases. Like tens of thousands, maybe. I don't know. I actually don't know.
When Liberation Hall decides to take on APB as a project and reissue a lot of these records, and certainly the Radio One sessions, how did that get introduced to you? Was this something that they came to you on, or were you actively looking to get these things out again?
It was actually it was through I think it was through Epi from my father's place in New York, and it was through him and our agent Rick Shore from it used to be. We've had him for forever, by the way. It used to be FBI, the booking agency, and it was him through Epi. Both of them said, "Look, these guys," and they said, "Do something. Are you interested?" We're like, "Well, of course we are." So the second one, Beautiful Blues, was never ever out on CD, so it was never released digitally. And the Something to Believe in album hadn't been available for God nearly 30 years. So it's good to have that in vinyl again. And the new vinyl sounds better than the old vinyl, I think. The new pressing of it does, I think so. The BBC Sessions one we never really promoted it very well the first time around either.
Yeah.
So
So the three of you are still together as an active band, you and George and Glenn. I mean, that's 45 years together. It's an awful long time to stay in one band. I mean, unless you just love the hell out of doing it and love playing with these guys.
actually, when we play live, Glenn and George don't do it anymore. They've kind of hung up their boots a bit. We've got a kind of a British version of it, which is me, my friend Dell, and John Russell. But John's been playing drums with us for about 30 years, 20 years now. And the American version is John, same drummer, me, and Stuart Brown, who was our guitar tech over there. And that's been the last two American tours. So Glenn and George don't actually actively play live yet, but they're still involved in the records and stuff. But, and George still does the artwork and any new artwork and stuff like that. But Glenn he had enough a few years ago, actually about 6 years ago. But he did the last American one he did was the Highline Ballroom. I think that was in 2016.
Now, will you guys be coming back to the States again anytime soon, or is that on hold for a little bit?
Well, we had an offer for the Gramercy Theatre in August this year, but everybody's busy, so we couldn't do it. But maybe next April or May, if the offer still stands, we'll do that, and at least that one. And then probably do like a Long Island one, and it'd be great to get up to. Where are you again?
Massachusetts.
Oh, right, Boston.
Yeah, like around the Boston area.
Yeah, because we used to play in Spit quite a lot.
Okay.
We always played there and Axis, and I think we did the Rathskeller as well. Great little corner, Lansdowne Road. It's etched in my brain.
Yeah, by Fenway Park, absolutely. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
yeah. So the Radio 1 sessions are coming out on Liberation Hall Records. They always do an amazing job with reissues and rare performances. It's a really interesting record label. I mean, I don't know what your sense is of the work they do, but everything I've seen from them has been really, really well done.
Yeah, great. Yeah, totally. What was it, Satan's Cats? I got there, and weirdly, I know Steve Eagles. Because he was in a band called Bang Bang Machine, and I was doing sound for them. This is about 15 years ago, but we haven't crossed paths in quite a while. But we have just on this label.
Yeah. Yeah, Iain, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. I wish you best of luck with the reissue, and thank you so much for taking the time today.
Marvelous. Thanks very much, Batsy. Yeah.
Take care now. APB's reissue of the Radio 1 sessions is available now from Liberation Hall Records. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to follow the show and join us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates. You can also email me at baxterrock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again to Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram at Chicopee for their support, and thank you for listening to Baxy's Musical Podcast.